The education landscape is constantly evolving. Staying ahead of the trends is essential. Welcome to EdBuzz LA County, where we explore groundbreaking initiatives, inspiring stories, and innovative practices shaping the future of learning here in Southern California. As of June 2023, over 58,000 students had been identified as homeless across the 80 public school districts and 362 charter schools in Los Angeles County. That is approximately 1 out of 20 students experiencing homelessness in LA County. I'm Elizabeth Grasswich, Executive Director of Public Affairs and Communications, and I'm joined now by Dr. Jennifer Kottke, LACOE's Homeless Education Project Director, to talk about the alarming issue of children and youth homelessness in LA County and to help bring awareness to the issues that they face each and every day. Welcome, Jennifer.
Great, thank you.
Let's start out with you explaining a little bit about your role here at LACOE and your responsibilities related to our homeless youth.
So I'm considered the Homeless Education Project Director, the Homeless Liaison for the County Office of Education. So there's required by federal law, the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act, that there be not only a homeless liaison within each district and charter, but also within our 58 county offices of education are also required to have a homeless liaison. So I serve in that capacity, and I work directly with the California Department of Ed Homeless Education Program, as well as serve and support the 80 school districts and the 362, I think, we're at charter schools, specifically the liaison. So my job is to reach out to the liaisons and the districts and charters, ensure that they have everything they need to support their students, particularly around ensuring compliance around the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act. But we've never really seen it as necessarily a compliance-based piece, but rather supporting students and ensuring their educational journey is successful. So we spend a lot of time doing a TA support, technical assistance. We do a lot with training. We do a ton of training. We travel around the county and ensure that we have a lot of supports out there. We distribute lots of materials as they need them. We ensure that we do a lot of consultations. I spend a lot of time on the phone, a lot of emails, walking through really difficult cases, and just supporting based on their needs assessments. So they submit usually annual needs assessments, the liaisons do, and then we try to do the best we can to support under those need assessment needs for their students. So we also have the privilege and honor to be one of the grantees for the Homeless Education Technical Assistance Center. So we are one of 3 county offices of ed that serve and support in a state capacity. So we also support the California Department of Ed in kind of a unique way in that we get to support the county offices within our regions. So it's quite a big role. We also do some work under Measure H, which is under the work that we do with the Board of Supervisors on the tax base that was passed back in 2017, and we have a 8-person staff that services and supports in the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, what we call LASA, and they do work specifically in the shelters and at the access points for families who are directly affected by being homeless. So, and youth, we support their youth program as well. So lots of big hats.
It really is, and that's one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on today, because you truly are an expert in this area, and so we're very lucky to have you here at LACOE.
Thank you.
And when you think about the number of students that we serve, I mean, that number, 58,000, I mean, it's mind-blowing to me, 4% of our student population. And yet, you know, my understanding is that the numbers could actually be much higher. Can you explain that a little bit? Yeah,
so that student count is typically a student count of students who are actually enrolled in school. And so the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act, which is, again, a federal requirements, actually covers ages 0 up through age 22, so the end of special education. And so we have a mandate to do everything we can to locate and identify as homeless liaisons, both at the county office and within the districts and charters, this particular population. So the numbers that we see, the 58,000, are largely students who are actually enrolled in our K through 12 systems. And so one of the things that I think gets a little bit swampy for us as liaisons, or liaisons both at the district districts and charters, as well as the county office, is how to collect our 0 to 5-year-olds, which aren't always enrolled in programs, especially our 0 to 3-year-olds, because they don't typically come into school systems until they may be like PK or TK or UTK. There's a lot of different preschool programs. And so we struggle with that 0 to 5 population. We do think it's probably what we call a mirrored population. So there's about 58,000 enrolled students, K-12. There's most likely about 58,000 or more 0 to 5-year-olds that we haven't captured. We do know by research that oftentimes our youngest population, our 0 to 5-year-olds, that there has a tendency to be quite a few of them, and maybe even larger than our K through 12 population. We know this population is highly stigmatized, and so we do find that families do not want to identify. And we also know through research as well is that oftentimes these families really struggle with being identified by the school because they're very concerned about being reported for child abuse related pieces or to the Department of Children and Family Services. That's one of our biggest concerns. We also know through research is that oftentimes we have been told by the state, and we see it across the states, that we do under-identify. And for various reasons, as I mentioned, stigma, undocumented students oftentimes are fearful that the school intervention will cause issues with possibly their immigration status. We have also seen issues, even though public charge is no longer kind of in place in the way it used to be, it's still a concern for a lot of our families. And so if they're undocumented, they have a tendency not to want to identify. But we say it's very complex, often very complicated as to why families choose not to identify, but it's a major factor. Unaccompanied youth, who are generally minors, are oftentimes fearful that they'll be required to go back to their homes. And a lot of those homes have a tendency to be very concerning places for young people to be. And so they oftentimes also will not identify themselves for fear of either DCFS intervention or possibly intervention from people who will return them back to unsafe locations, residents. So.
It's so challenging. And, my understanding too is the numbers of students, whether we know of them or they have been unidentified, are really climbing here in the county. And why is that?
Well, we have seen it seems like there's been this one event after the other. We were watching a decline for a while down into the 17-18, 18-19 school year. We were coming down off of about 72,000 identified down to, we were getting pretty low. But once we hit the COVID-related time period, that caused a lot of issues. A lot of our families don't do well with technology. The school was a lifeline for them, but there was no one there, so there was no place for them to go. So we saw a lot of disengagement. And then we've seen a lot of issues with following COVID with rates related to the moratoriums on evictions. So we saw evictions climb, and then there was moratoriums put in place, but then the moratoriums have largely now been removed. And then we have seen a huge issue with inflation, which has been kind of some of our current related pieces. And then the cost of living in both Southern California and California in general is extremely difficult for our families. There's just not enough housing, not enough low-income housing available to most of our families. So they have a tendency to double up, or they just can't afford it, and they do end up in precarious locations, like in their car or in tents or in shelters. So we have seen a number of different issues that cause our families to be in different spaces and places. So.
Well, you bring up a point that really surprised me when I entered education, is all the different living situations. And I think people have a certain idea of what experiencing homelessness might look like, but it's really complex.
Yes.
Sometimes, there are motels, sometimes, like you mentioned, cars. Can you explain that to our audience?
Yeah, so McKinney-Vento Assistant Act is very specific about what the definition for our students experiencing homelessness is. We call it a little bit gray because sometimes sometimes it does take a little bit of time to totally understand what's happening with the family, but there are some really distinct definition pieces within the federal law. So any students who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency fall under the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act, and that looks like a lot of different things. So a family who may be in an RV or a car, that's not considered fixed, or maybe they're possibly moving around at night in the sense that they're what we call house hopping or couch surfing. A young person may be in one house one night or 1 week in one place, and another family friend will take them in another week. That's not considered regular. And so that young person or the family moving around like that would also be considered McKinney, as well as adequate. So when we talk about families that may be living in what we largely call doubled up or shared housing, so multiple families per one residence. So families where you find an apartment, maybe a 1-bedroom apartment, and you have a family who might be living in the actual room, and then a family who's living in the living room, and a family who might be living where typically a kitchen table would be located. So you've got multiple families living in one very small apartment. Those situations are not considered adequate and would fall under the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act. So we also have a couple other definitions, which are any of our families who are in hotel or motels. Those would fall underneath as well. And then what we call our unsheltered families. So those are what we think of. I think when most people think about homelessness, those are our, quote unquote, typical homeless families. They're on the streets. They're sleeping in laundromats. They might be staying in a bus station. They might be in a all-night cafe. So they're staying in places that are not meant for human habitation. We have families that might be living at a resident, like a home. These are more of our gray situations. They're living at a home, but they're living in the garage, possibly on a floor. Or they may be living at a home, but they're living in a shed in someone's backyard. And the last piece of that definition includes unaccompanied homeless youth. These are young people who are minors. They generally are not 18 yet, and they do qualify for their own federal protections, and they lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency, and they're not in the presence of their guardian or parent. And they do have, as I mentioned, their own protections, and we do have quite a few of them. That's been a growing population, particularly over the last couple of years. We've seen a very high increase in unaccompanied homeless youth who are moving around the county and are in our schools, and oftentimes, again, they're very hard to find for fear that they may be asked to return to maybe unstable living situations. So, yeah.
So difficult.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act. Can you tell me a little bit about what the law requires?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, there is a requirement that there be a homeless liaison in every district and in every charter. It doesn't necessarily meet on every school site, but it requires that it is within every district and charter, at least one person. And that's actually a national piece. So that's McKinney-Vento Assistance Act is national because it is federal. And so if you go from California to Wyoming, there will be the same act in place. And it includes things like immediate enrollment. So there's no window of time if a family is coming to a school district or charter and they have determined that they are part of their school site. There's either they had been there before or they're within their residency. That's immediate enrollment, and then fully participating, which means the student is placed in classes as fast as possible. So we prefer that it be happening on the same day. We do every once in a while have families who will come like later in the day, or maybe they show up at 2:30 in the afternoon and school closes at 3. And so they'll start the process. And then once they come in back in the morning, they'll do everything they can to get them into class on that day. So immediate enrollment, there's also transportation requirements. So if transportation is needed and it's an issue for a family, that has to be removed. That's the large crux of McKinney-Vento, is that there's barriers to an education. Those barriers need to be removed. So that could include everything from maybe students need school supplies, or maybe there's some basic needs that are needing to be met. The school districts and charters do need to put in place funding streams to help with those pieces. There are pieces also tied to school of origin and school of residence. So school of origin, meaning that if they had been there previously within the last 15 months, they're allowed to return. And then school of residence is obviously if they live within the area, they're allowed to have that place to be at. If a student is living in one district now and was previously in a different district and wants to return back to a school of origin because they were there previously and were McKinney, they have the right to do that. So they can actually go back to a previous school, even though they may be in a different district. So we work with our districts and charters a lot around school of origin and school of resident, because it can get a little swampy in the sense that some of our families are moving around quite a bit. And so their school of origin may have been several schools back, but they may be actually moving around and be in their third or fourth district that they have moved into, but they have rights at their main school that they started in. The reason for that is stability. So our biggest thing for this particular population is when there's so much chaos going around in their world, stability in school is one of the biggest things. And then stability in school ensures that we're ensuring this population is making their way all the way through to graduation and beyond. So this population also has rights to ensuring that, if they're having issues, particularly unaccompanied homeless youth, that the liaison serves and supports these young people and to determine, what their wishes are and tries to help them navigate. Our population also has the ability to reach out to our liaison for any other resources outside the community. So liaisons are responsible for ensuring that referrals are not only done within the school district or charter, but also referring them to outside resources, such as housing for support. So there's quite a bit of supports and rights for this population. And we do a lot of training on that to ensure our population has the ability to access anything they need to access in order to be successful in academics. So
they do have such complicated situations, and thankfully there's so many requirements, and LACOE is here to support. So we provide training, resources, other things.
Yeah, and we do a lot of brainstorming. These cases can get super complicated, and so a lot of times we'll spend a lot of time kind of thinking outside the box. We have a number of districts, especially up in the Antelope Valley, where transportation can be very difficult, and so working to obtain the ability to transport students, possibly through different mixed methods, meaning possibly using gift cards to help them with gas, or reimbursement models, or looking at helping to come up with a way to transport in a way that the students are getting to school. Also, there's every once in a while we have little things that come up that are problematic. For instance, families living in RVs may run into issues with power technology. And so we've done different things to support families, things like maybe we help them to purchase like a solar receptor so that they could possibly have some type of power so that they can have access to technology. So it's little things like that make all the difference in the world of our students. And so that's what we're really trying to do is create a lot of equity across the entire educational experience, and ensuring that they're academically supported and that they're academically successful. So
when we were chatting before the show about some of the funding challenges, which really blows my mind, because there's so many conversations, important conversations going on in California about people experiencing homelessness, and yet we are seeing funding challenges around our youth, some of them our most vulnerable populations. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think oftentimes there's a lot of perceptions based on media and social media and what you see on television about homelessness. And a lot of what is seen on television oftentimes is tied to work that's done under HUD, which is our Housing and Urban Development. And so the reason I talk a little bit about that is because the majority of what you see on television and the housing related issues are separate than what we deal with in school, in the sense that there's a lot of money that goes to HUD. HUD receives quite a bit of funding. They don't service our shared housing population. 80% of our students are largely shared housing, which means they're living in the home of somebody else, either legally or not. Most of the time, they're not supposed to be there. And that population, that 80% of that population, 80% of our 58,000 students live in those shared housing. And most of those students can access McKinney because they qualify as McKinney. But they don't qualify under HUD. We have done a lot of advocating around funding. We're in this kind of weird space right now where we were given quite a bit of money under the American Rescue Plan, which has been great. We have some additional funding, but that funding will end September 30th of 2024. And then once that money is gone, any program changes that we were able to make under that funding will go with it. So we wanted to take a page from our foster youth services and offer countywide tutoring. So we've been offering some great tutoring supports over the past year. And so unfortunately, that's one of the programs that may not be able to make it past that September 30th window. And those services have been really critical. So we have done a lot of advocacy at both the state level as well as the federal level. We work very closely with our partners at CDE. We work very closely with Schoolhouse Connection, who's a national entity. And we've been doing some advocacy with NICL, which is a children's law-based center, to do some advocacy around state-related. So it's an inconsistent, not a great pool of funding. Restricted. We do have authorized requirements on how funding is spent, which I think is what helps us, stay audit safe. But they can be a little bit restrictive at time. But it definitely is not enough money to be able to really support this particular population. So yeah.
Can you share a little bit about the different partnerships that we have related to this population?
Yeah, we do a lot of partnering. And I think I mentioned at the very beginning, we're part of the Measure H, and we have CES educational coordinators. We have 8 of them. We actually subcontract with LAUSD. They are one of our partners. We have 5 of their staff members who serve on our CES educational staff. So LASA, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, is our partner who helps actually pay for this program. And these CES educational coordinators sit inside each of the access points. These access points are where when families are completely without any other resources, they can come to these access points, and then the access points will do intakes to determine how assistance can be provided. And when they come to those centers, one of the co-located entities that sits in there is education. So if they come as a young person and LASA is funded by HUD, so their youth component's a little older. They go up until age 24 and almost up to 25. And so when a young person comes through a TAY site, a transitional age youth site, or when a family comes into the family access centers, our CES staff can work with both of those sides of the house at LASA and connect them back to educational experiences. So we also have partnerships with supplybank.org. They are an entity that when you pay your taxes, there is a little place on there where you can donate money if you're interested in providing school supplies to students experiencing homelessness. We have lots of other partnerships. We have some work that we do with the public health. We have them on our kind of our back stream when we're looking for immunizations. They're a big entity of us. Immunizations are a huge struggle for this particular population. We work with School on Wheels. They're phenomenal. They do free tutoring services for any of our students who are sitting inside of our shelters or in our hotels or motels. And we have connected them with our tutoring program. So we do an exchange. So if a student comes through our through School on Wheels and they are a doubled up, we serve mostly doubled up in our tutoring program. So they'll pass those families to us and we'll support them, and vice versa. If we get a hotel motel, we pass them over to School on Wheels and they'll serve them. So we do work with, we've done some work with Baby to Baby, which has been exciting. There's a woman by the name of Tiffany Turner that does a shoe piece that we've worked with. We've done Shoes That Fit. We've partnered just with so many people because we don't have the funding. So the leveraging is really critical for us. And that's one of the pieces that most of our liaisons, we instill that into our liaisons as well, is understand your community and then understand who you can leverage with, because the funding is so little that the way to stretch your dollars is really to partner with others and to serve our families well. So our liaisons across the county have amazing partnerships. Feed the Children, like I could go on. There's lots of different ones that we work with. So,
that's great. There's so much partnerships and so many people out there that are willing to support you.
Yes.
Yeah. This work is hard work. It's important work, but it's hard work.
Yeah.
Is there a success story that you go to that really brings you joy?
I think I'm going to go back to where I came from. So before I came to LACOE, I was a brand new teacher and an employee of Roland Unified School District for 19 years before I came here. And I had the privilege and honor after leaving the classroom for a number of years to work at the Family Resource Center, which was their in-district, kind of almost like their community school model for in-district supports. And I ran that center for about 13 years. And one of the things that was being developed over time was helping our students get into higher ed opportunities. So these are students who are identified as McKinney, and they have definitely struggled over time. And so we have worked with them to identify higher ed institutions they're wanting to go to, and then work with them to actually get them into those institutions, and most of them on scholarships with full rides. And so the woman who took over my position that currently sits in that space, Miriam Kim, has just exploded that program into an amazing program. They recently got a Golden Bell. But just the stories that have come out of that higher ed connection, seeing our students move from being this McKinney-Vento space into successfully finding a four-year institution, and then not only completing, but then the cool thing is watching them come back and support. So we've seen some amazing things happen when our students are hyperly successful. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a four-year institution. We've just seen really neat things come back from our students when they're really successful. They come back and they help us continue to speak into the work that we're doing and help us to change it and make it even better. So
that's awesome. I mean, that's what we're here for, to get them across that stage and get them into college and careers. Well, thank you so much. I am so grateful to have Dr. Jennifer Kottke here today, helping us understand more about what homeless students go through and sharing with us resources for unhoused students. To learn more about LACOE's homeless education program, head to our website, lacoe.edu. I'm Elizabeth Grasswich. See you next time on EdBuzz.